In 2021, a barbecue joint run by 5 kids in their 20s, cooking out of a plain brick building on the south side of Fort Worth that you would drive right past without slowing down, was named the best barbecue in the entire state of Texas, largely on the strength of one brisket, best in Texas, ahead of Franklin, ahead of pits that have been burning since before World War II. Everyone wanted their rub recipe, but the real secret happens after the fire dies in a 12-hour window that most backyard cooks throw away completely. That joint is called Goldie's, and the young guys who run it didn't invent that secret. They learned it the same way every great Texas pitmaster learned it, by working the pits and paying attention to something the old meat markets had been doing for over 100 years without ever calling it a technique. By the end of this video, you'll have the whole method, start to finish. The trimming, the fire, the wrap, all of it. But the last step is the one that separates a backyard brisket from the kind people line up for at 7 a.m. and it costs you nothing. No new smoker, not one extra dollar, just information almost nobody uses. First, you need to understand why brisket punishes people, because the secret doesn't make sense until you know what it's actually fixing. A brisket is the chest of the cow. It's the muscle that carries roughly 60% of the animal's standing weight every day of its life, which means it is absolutely loaded with dense connective tissue, mostly collagen. Raw or cooked fast, collagen is like biting a rubber band, but held at the right temperature for long enough, it melts into gelatin, and gelatin is the entire reason great brisket feels rich and almost sticky on your lips. The whole game, every hour you spend at the pit, is really just one long negotiation with collagen. And here's the cruel part. The brisket is actually two different muscles, the fatty point and the lean flat, stacked on top of each other, and they finish at different rates. Cook until the point is perfect and the flat has usually dried out. That's the failure you've tasted. That's the gray, crumbly slice that made you want to quit. The men who first solved this problem weren't even trying to. In the late 1800s, German and Czech butchers in central Texas towns like Lockhart ran meat markets, and at the end of the week, they'd take whatever cuts hadn't sold, season them with what they had on the shelf, salt and black pepper, and smoke them over post-oak coals so the meat wouldn't go to waste. Crude's Market opened in 1900 and is still burning today. Farm workers would buy that smoked meat by the pound and eat it off butcher paper with their hands. No forks, because a meat market wasn't a restaurant. That accident of commerce became the entire Texas style, and buried inside their workflow was the secret this whole video is about, a thing they did every single night without ever thinking of it as cooking. Hold that thought, because we have to build the brisket that deserves it first. Start with the trim. Take the fat cap down to about 1/4 inch and round off the thin, flappy edges of the flat, because those edges will burn to jerky long before the center is done. 1/4 inch of fat is enough to baste the meat and still let smoke through. Then the rub, and this is where beginners overthink it. The old Lockhart markets use salt and coarse black pepper, roughly equal parts by volume, and that is still what wins in Texas today. Sound too simple? That's the point. Pepper builds the black crust, the bark, and salt drives moisture and flavor inward. Every additional ingredient you shake on is mostly a way to feel busy. The fire matters more than the rub ever will. You want post oak if you can get it, seasoned at least 6 months, and you want a small, hot, clean burning fire rather than a big smoldering one. Watch the smoke coming off your stack. If it's billowing white or gray, your fire is choking, and that smoke will paint the meat with creosote and make it bitter. You want smoke so thin it's almost invisible, with a faint blue tint against a dark background. Hold the pit somewhere between 250 and 275 degrees and stop obsessing over a 10-degree swing. The old pits in Lockhart have swung more than that for a century. Temperature stability is a wood fire skill you build with reps, and the brisket is more forgiving than the internet tells you. Then, somewhere around 160 degrees internal, the brisket will simply stop cooking. The thermometer will sit there for 2, 3, sometimes 4 hours. This is the stall, and it has ended more backyard cooks than any other single moment. The meat isn't broken, it's sweating. Moisture evaporates off the surface and cools the brisket at almost exactly the rate the pit heats it, the same way sweat cools your skin. The worst thing you can do is panic and crank the fire. The old-timers just lit another stick and waited. But waiting exposed a different problem, which is that hours of evaporation dry out the bark side of the flat. Aaron Franklin popularized the modern fix, and it came straight out of those meat markets. Wrap the brisket in butcher paper once the bark is set, dark and firmly attached, usually right in the middle of the stall. Paper, never foil. Foil traps steam and turns your bark to pot roast. Paper breathes just enough to protect the meat while the crust survives. Push on through the stall until the flat probes like warm butter, usually somewhere around 200 to 205 internal, and pull it. And this, right here, is where almost everyone fails. Not during the cook, after it. Here's what the average backyard cook does. 12 hours of work, the smell in the yard is unbearable. The family is circling. So the brisket comes off the pit, rests on the counter for 30 or 40 minutes, and gets sliced. And it's fine. A little tight in the flat, juice running out onto the board, which looks great on camera and is actually your moisture leaving the meat. Then that cook goes to a place like Goldie's, takes one bite, and can't understand the gap. Same cut, same wood, same salt and pepper. What are they doing that you're not? They're doing nothing. For 12 more hours, they are deliberately doing nothing, and that is the secret. Every legendary brisket joint in Texas holds its briskets. Not a 30-minute rest, a long, warm hold, wrapped, sitting in a warmer at roughly 140 to 150 degrees, often overnight. The brisket you eat at a top Texas joint at noon usually came off the pit the night before. Goldie's built their whole reputation on it. Franklin Barbecue holds for hours before service. And the old Lockhart meat markets were doing it in 1900 by pure accident, because smoked meat sat in the warm pit until a customer walked in and bought it. Nobody called it a technique, it was just inventory. The best kept secret in Texas barbecue was a side effect of waiting for customers. Here's why it works, and the science is genuinely on the old-timer's side. Collagen doesn't stop converting to gelatin the moment you pull the meat. In that 140 to 150 degree window, the conversion keeps going, gently, for hours, with zero risk of drying, because there's no longer enough heat to push moisture out. The rendered fat, instead of running off a hot cutting board, slowly settles back through the muscle. The juices thicken and redistribute so they stay in the slice instead of flooding out at the first cut. The bark sets from crisp brittle to that perfect leathery chew. A brisket that would have been a 7 at the 30-minute mark becomes a 9 by hour 8, and you never touched it. However, you don't own a commercial warmer, so here is exactly how to do it at home. The moment the brisket comes off the pit, leave it wrapped in its paper and let it sit out just until it stops steaming, around 15 or 20 minutes, so it isn't cooking itself aggressively in the wrap. Then move it into a home oven set to its lowest setting, ideally 150 degrees, 170 if that's as low as yours goes. No oven available? A dry, empty cooler with a couple of towels over the brisket will hold it warm for 4 to 6 hours. One rule is non-negotiable, and it's a food safety rule, not a flavor rule. The meat must stay at 140 degrees or above for the whole hold. Below that, you're in bacteria territory and no brisket is worth that night. Hold a minimum of 4 hours. 8 to 12 is where the magic lives. Plan your cook so the brisket comes off before you go to bed and gets sliced for lunch. One last trick since you've come this far. Before you re-wrap for the hold, pour a few spoonfuls of melted beef tallow, rendered from your own brisket trimmings if you save them, right over the meat. Goldie's does a version of this, and through a long hold that tallow slowly works into the lean flat, the exact muscle that always dries out on you. It's the cheapest insurance in barbecue. You were going to throw those trimmings away? Who would have guessed the scraps were part of the answer? So the great secret of Texas brisket turns out to be restraint. 120 years of Pitmasters, and the biggest single upgrade available to you is the willingness to smell that brisket all night and not cut it. Which raises an uncomfortable question about the rest of your cooking, doesn't it? How many meals have you pulled, sliced, and served out of 7 when the 9 just needed you to walk away? Try the overnight hold on your very next cook and taste the gap for yourself. And if you want the full deep dive on fire management next, the follow-up is already waiting for you. Your smoker's not the problem. Your clock is, word count 1650.